Are we?
Yes.
Where are we?
Here.
Why are we here? Not entirely clear. We are misfits thrust into existence by random chance, with no hints at all as to how we're supposed to make sense of it all. It's immensely bizarre. Here we are.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Here We Are podcast. I have a very special return guest coming back on the show today for his third time on Here We Are. And
Right.
yeah, and he did one of my stand-up science, or did you do two stand-up science shows?
Just one, but it was so amazing for both of us that it felt like two.
Well, it was an unusual show because the other academic was just kind of going through some personal issues.
Yeah. There was a lot of. I felt like we earned our therapy ally credit that night. I mean, it was fun to hear her talk, but it did feel a little sort of strangely personal.
Yeah, like this isn't your research. This is just your marriage problem.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite guests is back, Herman Pontzer, everybody. Herman, thanks for coming back on the show. Thanks for having me sit in and participate in your wonderful class at Duke. I don't even remember, what was the name of the class again?
Oh, it has some arcane. It's a introduction to human evolutionary anthropology or something like that. But it's just intro to human evolution, basically, is the class. And it's one of my favorite classes to teach. That's the class that got me tracked on this career. I came to college. I went to Penn State, had no idea what I wanted to do. But freshman year, just had my mind like blown by a good intro to human ev class. And man, so like to be able to recreate that on the other side of the room as the professor every year, I love it. I absolutely love it.
I think that once you start looking at life through that evolutionary lens, it's just a real paradigm shift.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And you have a new book out called Burn. Give us read the whole long extended.
Yes, Burn. New research blows the lid off how we really burn calories, lose weight, and stay healthy. And the reason I have to read the subtitle is I was going to, the subtitle I proposed was the new science of human metabolism, which I thought was a fair, accurate, pithy subtitle. But the publishers wanted to make sure that people knew that they were going to learn about diet and exercise and health. Which I don't blame them. I mean, they're in the business of selling books, and now I guess I am too. So I can't point fingers. And it is strange, though, as an academic, to sort of move. I've written some popular stuff before, and I like you're doing your show. Obviously, that's popular science. So you do hope people buy tickets and come to the show. So there's the element of it that I've done before, but to be fully in the selling your work space as an academic, that's an uncomfortable place to be, right? Because that's you're not supposed to sell your work when you're just doing it for the research. Of course, we all are anyhow, so it's sort of a funny anyway. That's the subtitle. That's the story of the subtitle.
Did you get on the academic OnlyFans yet, or are you? I'm thrilled about it. I mean, so it makes sense that a publisher is going to be like, ooh, diet tips for people. Yeah. People love those. But I'm actually kind of thrilled about it because I mean, I've taken your class. I know your work. I think it's incredible. I think having that evolutionary lens on things is a game changer, like I mentioned, but it's also, this is kind of especially timely. Other than, I mean, I hope it cuts through the weeds out there because we are inundated with so much diet and homeopathic and this and that. And it's like, I go into a bookstore and I'll tell you, speaking of kind of science communication, you don't get into it to make a fortune. Because if you go into a bookstore, you have the science section, which is like a few little rows of things, and then you have the children's section. Terrific, we want our kids to read, great. But then there's just like this mega, there's there's half of a church in there for religious stuff, and then there's all of the different diet and wellness and homeopathic and there's just so much pseudoscience out there. There's so much snake oil, and it's especially bad with COVID, where there's a lot of I think that there's a lot of kind of victim blaming going on.
I mean, it's like it's first of all, you only get sick with COVID if you're eating the wrong diet. That's what you would learn. If you read Twitter, that's what you would learn is, it's your diet. And
my ACE2 receptors are jacked. So if you got COVID, shame on you for eating Cheetos. You deserve to die.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, the even worse part of that, because that's almost kind of understandable. That's the age old. I knew immediately, confront men with a problem that their muscles aren't useful for in any way, and immediately you'll see them flexing the hardest they ever have in their entire. This is very important, I'm telling you. But the real, I think, nefarious side of it, and I don't even think it's intentional in a lot of cases, is just I just stopped selling this is actually the first podcast. There won't be any that I'm done with ads for Here We Are, because we're just supplement peddlers.
Wow. Yeah, right.
And then there's this motivated reasoning, you know, when you want to sell take this and it'll give you it'll give you a supervisor, like, take this super boss supplement, it'll make you strong and dominant. and then the other thing, my last little bit of this rant, is that, I watch a lot of stuff where some of the nutrition and everything is beyond me anyway. So even like, I know you speak in the language that I understand,
right?
But even with that, I mean, it's insanely complicated, and understanding. I was just looking at the graph early on in the book of there's this nice little flow chart of like fat and sugar.
Oh yeah. The subway map of where your nutrients go.
But you look at this, it's like, oh no, it's very intimidating, but people can use that to throw around a bunch of jargon. It just sounds like they know what they're talking about. And it's like the homeopath industry is this multi-billion-dollar. I have a bunch of delightful friends in the I'm kind of in the psychedelic community, and kind of new agey stuff, and a lot of that too, well-meaning stuff, but they have their little kind of placebo that works for them, and are a little overly prescriptive. And often once you start then making a living off of that stuff, there's this, instead of saying, hey, this supplement is a supplemental thing in addition to all of the other good things you should do to take care of yourself, including wearing masks right now, you can use this supplement. Instead, they're like, this supplement's going to save you. It's the magic bullet and nothing else.
Yeah, it's like vitamin D is, the vitamin C, and then vitamin D, and then it's, turmeric, and it's everything else. When I was, as somebody who does metabolic research, metabolism research, has been doing it for, a couple decades now. It drives you crazy, man. It drives you absolutely crazy to spend your life trying to do this stuff for real. And then to go, like you say, you go to your Barnes and Nobles or wherever you're going. Hopefully you're going to an independent bookstore somewhere. And yeah, it's just like the overwhelming number of books in self-help that have nothing to do with any, how many metabolism books are out there that have nothing, that don't have one study in them that measured calories at all, or anything like that. And so I think that was a part of the big reason to try to want to do a book. And I told the publisher, who was really supportive, by the way, and they were great. And I said, look, when I was getting ready to do that, I got nervous. I got cold feet towards the, as I was kind of agreeing to do it. I said, I don't want to write a diet book. I'm not going to write a diet book. There's not going to be like a menu chapter in there or something like that, or like the 10 fun things you can do, because it's not like that. That's not how it works. I want to talk about principles and how the body works, but I'm not trying to sell a particular diet or an exercise program, because I think it's not nonsense anyway. Yeah. And she said, oh yeah, no problem. And so I think I succeeded. I think I didn't write a diet book. I think I succeeded in writing an anti-diet book.
Yeah. That's what it looks like.
None of the magic that you're sold actually works the way it's sold.
Well, I mean, I do think that the placebo effect is absolutely incredible. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, I am all for people finding the placebo that works for them and keeps them driving forward in life. Yeah. But when that placebo starts entering into your science and reality denial, that's when I start taking issue with a bit of it. So on past podcasts, just to give people a sense, you're not just selling some diet fad. We talked about kind of why humans stand upright, and you're an evolutionary anthropologist, and you talk about. I imagine any of my listeners that have heard the show were captivated by hearing about, say, persistence hunting, which is our ancestors chasing down some mammal in the heat of the middle of the day, because we're these incredible distance hunters, because we can sweat and our lungs don't compress in certain ways when we run, and we got all into that. And so that's kind of a little bit of just quick broad strokes of what we've covered in the past. But in your class, I thought it was really cool the way that you could potentially find the teeth of a new species. Yeah. Get a sense of what its diet might have been. And then from that, even make inferences into how territorial it might have been, and maybe even mating patterns and stuff. Could you break down just a little bit? I remember hearing about the kind of vegetation, not having competition for vegetation.
Well, this is like a fundamental strategy question, a fundamental trade-off that every species faces, right? And the question is always this: do you go for the stuff that's the food that's easy to get and ubiquitous, and you can't, like leaves, like there's, you go into a forest and it's full of leaves. Do you eat leaves, which there's tons of them, you have to fight over it, or do you eat fruit? There's not much fruit, right? Or even worse, you try to go after animals, which are even harder to find, right? And so as you kind of move across the food spectrum, there's this, things like leaves or grass are, the plants just make tons of them. They don't invest tons in them. So there's not a lot of energy in them, because the plants themselves aren't investing tons in these structures. And they know that they're kind of, they're going to degrade. And so do you eat those structures, or do you go to the stuff that the plant really puts a lot of energy into? And there's obviously going to be less of that, right? And so for example, if we look at primates, the primates that are eating leaves, right? They've made that decision, right? That's their strategy. And you have leaf-eating monkeys, and the colobus monkeys are part of that group. You have howler monkeys down in South America that are leaf-eating monkeys. They're not that territorial, because why would you bother, right? Why would you bother trying to keep another set of monkeys out of your leaves? Because who the hell cares? Just go over and find other leaves. right? And then and we should say that the kind of teeth that you tend to see evolving in species that specialize in leaves have the crests. If you run your tongue around your teeth, you feel those bumps. In a primate that eats leaves, you feel those bumps are kind of like they're like blade-like, right? They're not like bumps; they're more like a blade, and that's because leaves are actually kind of tough, and so you want to slice them up rather than try to crunch them up. And so that's leaf-eating monkeys or leaf-eating primates. You see those slicing blade-like teeth. In a monkey that eats fruit, or an ape that eats fruit, like all of our ape relatives eat fruit. Gorillas eat a lot of leaves, but chimps and bonobos eat a lot of fruit, orangutans eat a lot of fruit. Their teeth are shaped for fruit. Now because they're eating fruit, they're really territorial, because now, right, at any given time of the year in a rainforest, there isn't fruit everywhere. There's fruit in a couple of places. And if you don't protect that fig tree, right, you don't protect that drupe tree, it's too bad for you. You lose out, right? And so you see territoriality, and you see sort of specialization on that, and that changes how you're social, because if you want to be territorial, it helps to have a group that you, right? So all these things connect, and that's one of the really fun things about teaching that class, or just about the work that I get to do anyhow, looking at human evolution and primate evolution, is making all those connections, because there's really only one thing that our bodies are built to do, and that's reproduce, right? I mean, that evolved to do. And everything is this big integrated circuit to make that happen. And so you can pick any one piece, and if you know how to do it, you pull it out, and everything else comes out with it, like, like the thread of a sweater. You can figure it all out.
I'm just taking notes on my new dirty talk in the bedroom. I was this is 3.5 billion years of evolution. This is
that's right.
What's happening?
Yeah, that's right. Look, don't fight it. You can't fight it. Can't fight evolution, right?
So there's other in that same way, and we've kind of talked about a bit of when humans kind of started standing upright, and the cost benefits of that. And I think this was in your class as well, where you were talking about you could look at kind of the wear on a femur bone, and where it's like connecting with the hip.
So that's not wear, right? So not the wear of it, but to figure out the posture of animals, you can look at their bones, and so it's not really the wear of it exactly. Although, so one thing is interesting: if you some postures that really stress your joints at like the limits of their range will end up sometimes making like divots in the bones. So like if people who squat, who spend a lot of their lives squatting, you have to really flex your ankles up, really, up against your shins. Your feet come up against your shins, and so that leaves a little divot in your ankle and your talus and your tibia. So you can, in your tibia actually, where it hits your talus. Anyway, so you can sometimes see that. So sometimes it is kind of a wear thing. But we were talking about with the upright walking, and the more common the way that we look at bones in this way is that so bone is a responsive material, right? The bone that you have, and the thickness of the bone and the robustness it has, your genetics are a big part of it. Obviously, the overall shape of the bone is determined by your genes, but how thick the bone grows, how strong it grows, and in different parts of the bone, how strong it grows depends entirely on how it gets pushed around, the forces that act on the bone over your life. It's called Wolff's Law. This guy in the 1800s figured it out. And so there's a very particular way you can imagine that, the set of forces that come down through your pelvis and into your femur, your thigh bone, they're very different if you're walking on two legs and you're supporting all your weight on your two hind legs all the time than if you're on four legs, right? Like a dog or a cat or a chimpanzee for that matter. And so that very particular distribution of forces down through the pelvis and the hip joint and into the femur, that leaves us a signature stress regime, and that leaves a very signature set of thicknesses along. You can kind of map the thickness of the bone, because your bones are like tubes, right? I don't know if everybody knows that, but your bones are like tubes, and so the wall of the tube reflects how much bone's been built up there in response to that stress. And so if you map the thickness of the tube of the bone as you go from the hip joint down, you can actually see that we are adapted to a particular set of stresses for walking upright. And then once you know that, now you can go into the fossil record and you find like just a chunk of femur, and you're like, well, how could you tell anything from that? Well, the answer is because we know how it all works. So we can now map the thickness in that bone, that little chunk of bone, and go, that thing walked upright. Sure, but it has to be.
Yeah, and so you have you also, how do I want to say this? There's this. I love talking about the modern mismatches with our, of course, with the world that we were built in and kind of for. I'll put that in quotation marks, not to say that one way is better than another, whatever, but something that that was a regular part of our environment through much of our evolutionary history, and then humans' ability to cooperate and make new technologies and tool use and reshape instead of everything else slowly evolving over hundreds of thousands, millions of years to shape themselves into the environment and carve out this niche. We could just like, I'm just going to build this here the way that I want it to be. And you can't always foresee the things like, our brain hasn't evolved to be in a cylinder that's flying through on the ground at rolling on the ground at 70 miles an hour. And now when I'm sitting here reading a book, I'm getting car sickness because my brain doesn't know what to do with this weird mismatch and thinks maybe I ate something poisonous. And this is something you're not going to think about when you're engineering these new technologies and stuff necessarily. And now we've constructed this entire modern world built on these new all of this. We've kind of ripped apart the scaffolding and built this new modern environment that we're now dependent on a lot of ways, and is kind of mismatched with our evolved bodies and metabolism. And you can look for clues. You can use science to kind of make inferences into solving the mystery of reverse engineering. Okay, how many calories are we actually supposed to be taking in? How much fat are we actually supposed to be taking in? But you also go and you've been an anthropologist working with hunter-gatherer ish people. Are they still predominantly hunter-gatherers? Or?
So you're talking about the work that we've done with the Hadza group in northern Tanzania, Hadza population. A lot of them still do hunt and gather. They're not a big population, 1,500 people or something like that. Some of them have kind of moved into the towns or moved, they kind of moved away from the bush camps. But a lot of them still do hunt and gather. That's how they get, 90% of their food. Occasionally the government will drop off a sack of beans or something like that in the next village over, and they'll walk a day out and get their sack of beans and bring it back to camp, and that'll last a few days. But that's marginal, and then the rest of it's all wild game. And wild plants. So they're still hunting and gathering. Not everybody, but a lot of them are. But so it's interesting to kind of think about it that way. It's the analogy that comes to mind as you're describing it, I think is probably fits pretty well as, in the industrialized world, we're like, like kids from rich families that grew up with everything they ever wanted. I don't know. I wasn't in that kind of a family.
Me either.
But I had friends, or they weren't always friends that did grow up in those kinds of families, and they're the ones that like in elementary school, it seemed like they had it made, in middle school, you're like, God, that's pretty great. But by high school, you're like, something's not right. Like, I don't know if you're supposed to have a Porsche when you're 16. And then, by the time college rolls around, like they've got, drug addictions and everything else. Not everybody, but, to paint with a broad brush,
I'm happy to paint with a broad. Let's get these rich fucks.
Yeah,
the other thing is in COVID, it's just there's something about when the wealthy are confronted with global pandemics that just makes them yearn for gallivanting, and that's just like when they need to be hopping in jets and having soirees and stuff. It's just, and that's not even. I have a kind of a wealthy family member who just married a rich dude, basically, and that's like, because when you're wealthy and you don't do anything for work, you just host. You're just a host. That's like your full-time job that you've given yourself.
If they're a host, does that make everybody else parasites?
Yeah, I think so.
But if you're a rich person and you have all the stuff, like, all the things that they want are the things any of us would want, right? They want more. They want, a nice place to live. They want good food, and they want all these things. And you're like, the wanting it's not the wrong thing. The having it all, that's what gets you into trouble. You know? And it's like the hunter-gatherers I work with, and other, go to just about anywhere on the globe outside of the rich countries, and the things that people want are the things that we all want. They want good food, and they want, a safe place to live. And it's good to want those things, and I hope they get it. But like, now you're in this weird engineered world that we built ourselves, that we don't just want it. We can just have it.
Yeah.
Right. And so we have all the rich foods that we have always wanted. Right. Because like a million years ago, being really motivated to go out and get some fat and sugar, hey, that's a really good motivation to have. That makes a lot of sense. And now we have that motivation, but not just the motivation, we can fulfill it every day. And now you get diabetes, right? So it's like the motivations all make sense. And now we're in this weird place where we are the rich kids that can have it all.
Yeah.
And that's where the trouble comes in, But then I don't know. I think it's interesting that your own completely good, well-founded, well-evolved motivations can get you into trouble if you actually get what you want.
We're all a bunch of broke rich kids, essentially, in our modern world. Someone had some tweet. They compared during everything with Trump and COVID and everything. They were saying America looks like a third world country wearing a Gucci belt right now. But there's basically in our hunter-gatherer ancestors, in all of the span of time, there was probably rarely a situation where you came across a bush and it had like a strawberry that was just so gigantic and sweet and juicy that you had to be like, oh, I better not.
Right.
No, that's gonna...
Yeah, there's no ice cream on the savannah,
So there is no, we're just kind of in a modern, what was this very essential drive to keep, you don't have a refrigerator, you need to keep on finding new sources of food and potentially new territory or whatever else comes along with it, day in and day out, year after year. And all of the sudden, this amazing, impressive trait looks like this narcissistic, bottomless pit of want in a modern world.
Yeah, we don't know when we're full, right? I mean, it's sort of like, well, existentially, we don't know when we're full.
Yeah. So what can you say about, I remember in your class kind of continuing on the sort of tooth conversation.
Yeah.
I remember, oh man, your slide game is off the hook. I know I sat in on a few classes last semester, and I felt for everyone involved with having to teach remotely and everything.
Yeah.
But wow, you got some great slide game. It's
thanks,
I even emailed you. I was like, can you hook me up with those slides? But you had this terrific, nice, easy to understand pie chart about kind of how much meat, vegetation, fruit, roots, whatever, etc., that our ancestors would have generally been consuming. This is probably a good point to point out that not all of our hunter-gatherer ancestors were persistence hunters, for example.
Right.
Some of them were Eskimos or whatever else. And so, but just kind of generally speaking, can you break that down?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, when you look, the Hadza are a good example of this, and I know them the best, so I'll talk about them. If you were to just calculate out like a rough average, calories from meat and calories from everything else, and everything else includes a lot of honey, about 10 or 20% of their diet in a given day is probably honey, and plant foods, berries and baobab fruits, and tubers are a big thing. They eat a lot of wild tubers, root vegetables. If you were to break that down, you'd find it's about 50% animals and 50% honey and plants, right? Now that would be like your very rough average, but that would kind of miss the point, because if you look day to day, that changes wildly depending on what they happen to find that day. And if you look even month to month or year to year, you see these big changes. So one thing I've been doing, that when I work with the Hadza, when I go there, I go inevitably with this guy, Brian Wood, who's a researcher at UCLA now. Brian's fantastic, and he's been working with the Hadza for decades. So he has a lot of long-term data on this. He always looks at food returns when we go there. So when they come back to camp, when they go out and forage, the men and women go out and forage, they come back to camp, they know that if we're there, like, oh, those guys like to keep track of what we got. So we very nice. And they come by the research part of the camp and they let us weigh the food they bring in. So we know what they're eating. Anyway, we have data on this going back to the 1980s, even before Brian started working there. And it's really variable. There's there's weeks and even months when they're eating like all meat. There's weeks and months when they're eating all plants. And so that rough average of 50-50, what I like about it is that it pisses everybody off, because if you are a vegan proponent, sorry, actually they eat a lot of meat. And if you are a keto proponent, then sorry, they actually eat a lot of plants. So that's nice. Everybody can get angry.
Yeah.
But it misses the point that the variation is kind of the point. That's actually what you experience when you're there, is variation.
And so do you have, because I haven't read your book because it's not in hardcover yet, and I can't stare at a screen any more than I already am. And also I've been having more authors on recently, and so my listeners are just getting to hear the many excuses that I have for not reading ever.
Well, you know what, though? I don't want to cut you off, but let me just say this. At least you are admitting not reading the book. I've had several interviews now about the book, which I'm excited about. I love that there's interest in it, and I will not name anybody. And some have read it, but so many clearly haven't that it's comical.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So do you? I'm kind of. So I'm going to combine a couple thoughts into. Kind of regarding diet, regarding if you do want to be a vegetarian, or you are like, well, the ethical thing to do is to only eat meat all of the time because, or because you're a keto person or whatever. And likewise, there's so this is going to be question one, and they're going to combine together, and then I'll just kind of let you have at it in whatever way you want. But they are there things that that we can do to kind of paleo-ish hack if you are going to be vegan, what you want to be aware of in the modern environment, things that our modern life can afford, these new ways of living in these new systems. And as I mentioned, paleo, I did CrossFit however many years ago, was my first kind of introduction into exercising and taking better care of myself. And that's not what you want your introduction to exercise to be.
You survived, at least.
I survived. Good. It's intense. It's impressive. I worry that people would hurt themselves if they knew as little about exercise as I did. But it was funny because I've always been into evolution, and especially in the last decade or so. And so going in and having it framed as here's what our ancestors did, and the first day be like, we don't do curls in here because who lifts stuff up like that? I'm like,
right.
Everybody, all of the time lifting things like that. What are you talking about? Like, this is just for superficial. I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure I pick things up like this. Meanwhile, I'll tell you the way I've never picked a thing up is with an overhead squat. Why are you trying to convince me that somehow our ancestors were doing these bizarre, you're moving your shoulders back in these strange ways? And you were saying that was one, if you could touch on that thing we glossed over of people that squat a lot, have different wear on their bones. That's fascinating, if you could mention that too. But is this a bunch of baloney, or is this a new modern way of kind of hacking look, we would have been running marathons chasing down an antelope or something like that, but now you just got to do these weird moves and you got to do a downward dog, and it looks ridiculous, but it gets you where you need to.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, when you go to a Hadza camp, my first question always is, where's the big tire that we're going to flip? I see the ropes, I got that set up, but where's the tire?
They must look so, they just get done with persistence hunting, just 4 hours of just jogging after some beast, and then they get done and they get back and you got a treadmill set up that you're just jogging in one place. It must be the most confusing thing.
Yeah, totally. No, so I mean, so the question I think is the right one, right? And it's how do you take the principles that you learn and apply it, right? Like, you don't, the idea here isn't that you are going to cosplay as a hunter-gatherer, right? I mean, people do that, which I think is its own weird
something
thing. It's its own thing. Good for them. I hope they're happy. But the principles
if they're listening right now and offended, they're not living the lifestyle.
Yeah. I guess that's right. Well, yeah. So the principles, right? So what are the principles? So what the principles for diet would be, if you're eating foods that could not have existed, prior to engineering, then that's probably not a great idea in terms of, as a way to base your diet, and actually, for that matter, it brings up this important point, which is that people say, I'm going to eat vegan, I'm going to be healthy. Well, you can, because our supermarkets are full of all kinds of products that are super engineered and energy rich, and they might even be vegan. You can be a vegan and eat totally unhealthily, right? I mean, you could just chug vegetable oil. That's vegan, right? You could just eat salt by the cup. That's vegan. So you can be vegan and be unhealthy. You can be and be unhealthy. You know what I mean? You could just go and buy like bacon and just eat it raw like that only, and that would also not be great. So there is our weird engineered supermarket foods. They allow us to take what would be healthy principles, like I'm going to eat fruits and vegetables, and just completely, to funhouse mirror them into this weird thing. So we actually
here's a fruit and vegetable flavored,
right? Yeah, exactly.
Piece of plastic.
Yeah, I mean, where do you think sugar comes from? Sugar comes from fruit. But so the principles would be this, and this is like not new stuff. Eat whole foods that your grandparents would recognize. If it has a long ingredients list and a mascot on the package and an ad campaign, it's probably not the best for you. And so there's actually really cool work done by this guy named Kevin Hall at NIH, which they do this cool study where you feed somebody ultra processed foods only. That's all they get, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 2 weeks. And they're like they are on a metabolic ward. So they can't leave the building. So what they're eating. They really are eating this food. Only ultra processed foods for 2 weeks. And then you switch over and then you eat the unprocessed versions of those foods. So it's all matched, same amount of carbs, same amount of protein, same amount of fats. And when they're on the ultra processed foods, they gain weight. Even in those 2 weeks, they gain weight. Wow. And the unprocessed foods, they actually lose a little bit of weight. And then, by the way, they randomize it. They do it, so if you some people start processed and go to unprocessed, and some people start unprocessed and go to, so they do it, they're smart about it. They do it in a balanced way. So it's not just an artifact of time. And yeah, so we know that, it isn't the carbs and it isn't the fats, and it's the fact that ultra processed foods are quite literally designed by people in labs to make sure that you eat them. I mean, and guess what? It works because they're good at their jobs. Of course it is. And so that the principle one would be that don't eat that stuff. And if you want to know beyond that, you could say like, well, more fiber is good because fiber makes you feel full on less. More protein is good because protein makes you feel full on less. But you could go high protein on a keto carnivore diet. You could go high fiber on a vegan diet. And both of those people are going to end up eating fewer calories and probably lose a little bit of weight and probably feel better. But they'll still argue on Twitter about who's right. Is it the meat-based or the plant-based? And you guys are idiots. And it's actually completely the same game they're playing, just, with different jerseys on.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's such a good quote. I want to say, because you and I think, are roughly the same age, people should probably be thinking about what their great grandparents would have.
Oh, you have young people. Are they? Do the youngs listen to this podcast?
I don't think so, but just in case. I mean, I think that I think that they're 30 to 50-year-old listeners mostly. Yeah. But I would say that
that might be right.
As someone who has been home, having home cooked meals for the first, having gone out, seen the world, eaten all of the many delicacies the world has to offer, and then came back to the Midwest, I've noticed that a lot of the kind of Midwest diets are kind of what happened was there was a period of time where, a couple generations ago, where all of the sudden you could get a can of gravy or whatever, and you have 7 kids, and you can get this thing. That's kind of when it all first started, and then there's this population boom too, because you could just get all of this canned processed stuff and dump it in and have this whole big casserole and stuff for pennies. And so I think you need to go one generation past that, as I think my grandparents are where the problems started, diet wise. It's when they started kind of leaving the farms for the first time.
Yeah, that might be right.
And that being said, there's another thing that, so there's so much conspiracy stuff going on now more than ever. And it's like, well, like you said, how come they don't mention vitamin D on the news? How come they don't mention my keto diet if they care about public health? It's like, oh, what world have you been living in where they don't talk about health everywhere constantly all of the time, and someone's peddling some new thing. I think they mentioned it. Yeah, we get it. Diet and exercise. It's trying to figure out like the simple ones that actually work rather than the endless fads. Always. But within that, I think that people kind of think like, ooh, this is Coca-Cola plotting against our health. And it's just that they had a product people liked, and then I'm sure there's all sorts of cover-ups. I'm sure they're not marketing the idea of how bad it is for you, but they're just satiating a desire for sweet, tasty.
Yeah. Although, since you bring up Coca-Cola, there's an interesting little wrinkle there, which is that so Coca-Cola, they started something called the Global Energy Balance Network. Ever heard of them?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, so they started this idea. So one of the things, so as background, one of the things that comes out of my work, but other people's too, is that it's actually really hard to change your weight with exercise alone, because your body does all these interesting adjustments. And so if you exercise more, your body adjusts and doesn't spend as many calories on other stuff. And so that's a whole other place we can go.
Interesting.
But because of those metabolic adjustments, it's really hard to lose weight with exercise. Those same metabolic adjustments make it really good to exercise, because those adjustments are good for you, but they don't affect weight very much. Okay. So we've actually known this for decades, that exercise is not a good tool for weight loss. But if you're Coca-Cola, you don't want to hear that, because the implication then is that its diet is the weight loss, is the weight management tool, right?
Yeah.
And sugary beverages probably aren't going to be a big part of how you lose weight. And Coca-Cola doesn't want to hear that. And so they actually they started a global energy balance network, no obvious connection to Coca-Cola, right? I mean, if you went through the fine print, you could find it, but basically no public connection to Coca-Cola. And they started funding researchers in the US and elsewhere if they had a study that was going to look at exercise as a way to lose weight. They wanted that study funded, because you'll find something and you'll publish it, and so it was a total. So I agree for the most part that these food companies aren't malicious, although there's some interesting examples of them being malicious.
Yeah, of course, and I think they can be. No, I think they're malicious in a lot of ways after the fact. I think that they didn't start out day one hashing on a board of like, here's how we get rid of the population. It was just once the money's coming in, you're like, okay, here's how we cover up that the population is kind of winning because of us. It's kind of the way that I've been thinking about this lately is, imagine, and this isn't, I don't know anything about hummingbirds, and for as far as I know, I think hummingbird feeders are actually kind of good for keeping the populations robust enough in a modern environment. That's where we're paving over everything. But just for a thought experiment, imagine you put out a hummingbird feeder, and all of a sudden this hummingbird that's evolved over millions of years to fly around for these tiny little bits of nectar everywhere, and the plants you're pollinating for you're not aware of any of this. You're just driven to go out and look for the cues to go up and slurp up this little bits of stuff, and there's never just this waterfall of nectar that happens in your life, and all of a sudden some little old lady hangs up a hummingbird so she can look at a hummingbird from time to time, and my God, this is this is everything you could have ever dreamed of. Well, set up camp there. Then you get satiated over time, and then now you're not helping the plants pollinate. So now the environment's changing. There's desertification, and all of a sudden, and now you're not flying as much. So you're starting to get fat, and you're drinking way too much of this wonderful tasting stuff. And now you got to start thinking like, is this person plotting against me? They've ruined the environment. Like, no, that's just a little old lady that thought it would be neat and has no idea of the long-term implications of of doing all of that. And I think that we kind of humans are doing that to ourselves over and over again. And then after the fact, you go like, whoa, hey, you don't, you know, don't call the cops on me for putting up a hummingbird feeder. So you might like do things to manipulate stuff after the fact.
All my hummingbird feeders are full of just pure lard because I want my hummingbirds to go keto. So a little red food coloring, you in the sun, you can get it to go liquid. Here's what I want to know. I want to know why screens are more compelling than real life. Right? My children, we just had a conversation about screen time. And, you know, in the Pleistocene environment, there were no screens. And so why do they find it more captivating to like watch things happen on a screen than to talk to each other or do something real? I mean, and I get it. I watch TV too. I get it. But it's like, why is that? Is it just because you distill? Is it just distilled social interaction and distilled stuff that, you know, real life takes too much time and it kind of like the pace, you know, if we have to talk to the director for real life because the pace is a little bit slow, or is it, I don't know. What do you think?
It's real life on steroids, and then it's also our kind of hopes and dreams, and it's these windows into. I mean, it was pretty rare in our modern environment that you could go sneak a peek at someone else banging or whatever else. But also there's like David Attenborough stuff, for example. I love nature. I love thinking about evolution. I love, you get this amazing shot of this flower and this bee pollinating it. Wow. I go outside and look at that. I'm like, I'm trying very hard to appreciate this in the same way. But what your eyes don't know is like, oh, they've used this telescopic lens. Like what I'll do is I build out this studio. I'll move things forward. I'm pulling this back. I'm changing the angle so it looks like someone else behind a camera. You'll use a telescopic lens that will make me look really nice, and the background will fade some. I'll set up the right kind of light to soften all of these tones so that the shadows on my face look just so. And, you know, so you can kind of Instagram all of everything and put these filters on, and you kind of don't have a chance. It's kind of like the Mickey Mouse phenomena, the evolution of Mickey Mouse, changing eyes and everything over time. And
it's scary though, man, because like, what's the end game? What's the I mean, I guess we sort of all have it. We have, you know, attentional diabetes, right? In the same way that like our diets make us sick. And I mean, I'm not the first one to complain about screens. It's not a new critique, but like, you know, it just changes fundamentally, like you say, how you can appreciate the real world. And that's a scary thing. Because honestly, you know, COVID has made me live in this new Zoom world. And I'm not a big fan, I got to say.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. So if this is where we're going. Jesus.
Well, I think a lot of people, I mean, I think there's also a lot of like modern historical leftovers of kind of the Industrial Revolution and the drive to crank out all the widgets, and then TVs popped up out of nowhere and it was this new novel thing. But I also think people kind of get used to it over, you know, get like banner blindness over time. And I mean, kids are going to like TV more because kids don't have nuanced taste in things. And, you know, and I think people are missing out on, you know, you can like sit and think. Like I do it all of the time. Yeah. I'll just sit, not write, not read, nothing. I'll just sit and think for an hour, sometimes hours at a time. And people think you're crazy for doing it, but it's being an active participant in the exploration of in your inner world rather than passively watching it given to you on TV. So I think people will just need to, you know, it's just mindfulness and becoming more aware of, oh, you can't just drink Coca-Cola all the time and TV is the version. You just can't put the Coca-Cola that is television in your eyes all the time. too.
Yeah.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask you. This is, so I'm using this kind of hummingbird example of, bam, out of nowhere, 3.5 billion years of evolution, millions of years of bird evolution. I'm looking at my own beard. Bird evolution leading to this specific trait, and then out of this bizarre abnormality that you weren't psychologically prepared for, that seems like this terrific thing, and now you're mad at this lady that forgot to feed it. You go to look, and bam, you run into a window because you're evolved environment. You didn't evolve in an area with solid transparent walls and things. Otherwise you could have developed the eyesight to navigate it, but you're not, in your single lifetime, you're not going to really evolve the abilities to pick up on those things. So what are some simple things from your book, because the what's their name again, the
Hadza.
The Hadza don't need to know about calories and
That's
stuff.
right.
They don't need to know what the difference between saturated fat, this other kind of fat, or
yeah. So, I mean, the reason I'm excited about working with the Hadza as an anthropologist is because, they're a modern population like you and me. Of course, like anybody on the earth right now, they're modern, but because they have these hunter-gatherer traditions, right, they kind of become this way of looking back and wondering what it would be like in time back in our ancestral condition. And so they're really cool that way as an anthropologist. But as from a public health point of view, they're really cool because, like I said, they don't get diabetes, they don't get heart disease, any of that stuff. And so all the stuff that is most likely to kill you and me, right, they don't have to worry about it. They're not going to get it. And they don't even think about diet. They don't think about exercise. So something about just the way they live their life is protective against that. And so what are the principles? Well, like I say, first of all, in terms of diet, eat whole foods that your great grandparents would recognize. Don't eat these weird process engineered foods. And then in terms of activity, you got to be active every day. There's really kind of no cheat code on that one. You got to get active as much as you can. Unless you are an Olympic athlete that is training so hard that your body starts shutting down, right? Overtraining syndrome. Unless you're that person, everybody else could exercise more and it'd probably be good for you. Mm-hmm. Right. And it doesn't have to be exercise. Like, this is another thing that makes you crazy. In the same way that the fad diets make you crazy. The fat, CrossFit stuff, fantastic. If you love CrossFit, please go and do it more. It's good for you. And if you do it safely, and that's wonderful. But the idea that you have to exercise this way and not that way just drives me crazy.
Yeah.
Just get out and move, man. Get out and move. And if you want to be Hadza about it, then you try to get 2 hours of movement in a day. Yeah. And I don't always achieve that. I don't usually achieve that, but I should, and we all should. And so that might be, maybe that's maybe a jog for half an hour, but then you still got an hour and a half left where you probably ought to get on your feet, walking around the house at least, walking to, when you're allowed to again, walk into a coffee shop kind of thing. Just movements is good. And you don't have to be, religious about it in a particular kind of movement or kind of exercise. Just get out moving. Those are the principles. Eat real food and move,
Yeah.
But there's the screen time and there's the Coca-Cola, and it makes it really hard. But,
I have an experiment for you. You take you got two islands. They have the same kind of food and whatever else. They're just like little slivers of America or something like that. They have everything that you could want in a modern society. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to give one of these wellness people, say Toledo, Ohio, or something, and I'm going to get Livonia, Michigan, or something like that. And so the leadership is, we give people these like CrossFit pep talks every day, and we inundate them with every new cutting edge fad that there is, and these life hacks, and some of them are great and some of them are going to work really well, and there's a variety, so you can find the one that works for you and everything else.
Yeah.
And then I have but then in my city of Livonia, I'm just going to give people smaller plate size. That's it. Just a smaller plate size.
Yeah.
Not have to figure out all of the many complicated other things. And I'll put money on my city. That's not, that's not including the exercise portion of it. Just kind of nutrition.
Yeah. No, that's it. I mean, one of the things that my publisher was really excited about when I wrote this book, I was like, well, she's like, well, what do you think about in terms, is a calorie just a calorie? And I'm like, you're talking to a metabolic researcher. Yes, by definition. That's like asking, is a shoe a shoe? Is a brick a brick? Yeah.
Right.
Is a calorie? Of course it is. And so all these diets just work when they work because you cut calories. So if you can, wave a magic wand and every plate in Livonia, Michigan gets smaller, right?
Yeah.
We know it'll happen. Obesity levels will go down. People's resting blood sugars will get better.
Yeah.
Everything. People won't get as much diabetes as often or heart disease as often. You would save lives. Absolutely. And make people less.
I know because I've traveled around the world and I've looked at plate sizes and portion sizes everywhere. Yeah. It's just a huge, huge difference.
Absolutely. So I lived in the Midwest for a while. My first job out of grad school was at WashU in St. Louis. And we were there for 4 years. And so I went from Boston, which is very like waspy, New England, that ethic, the Protestant ethic, you're not supposed to have too much fun. That's dangerous, to St. Louis. And the difference in cuisine was just staggering, because you'd order a salad in St. Louis and it was like full of cheese and processed meat, even at like the fancy restaurants were like that. And it's just telling them like, oh, if that's your idea of like a low calorie meal, then no wonder, you have these sort of regional differences. And there's plenty of people who suffer cardiometabolic disease and get overweight in New England as well. It isn't that regional, but you can understand why you see these sort of population differences, because what people think of as healthy even sometimes is just crazy.
Yeah. It sure is. The Midwest is a trip. What do you, as you're kind of, we brought up TVs, and I've been thinking about this in terms of the diets and stuff, because I absolutely love that the point about making something really dogmatic. I just hate that. I have an anti-dogma that I live by, and don't argue with me on it. It's the idea that, what happens is someone does dial into specifically what works for them. Mm-hmm. You have Jocko Willink, who is like, I'm going to take my picture of my watch of Instagram. I wake up at 4:00 every morning and I get after it. And life is full of obstacles you got to headbutt through. And another wall to break through. Good. It'll just make my head stronger as I smash through. And the thing is like, it works great for him, because he's like, he had a slightly abusive childhood. He had a certain genetic makeup. He had military training.
Right.
He became a Navy SEAL. He has a different relationship with pain. He has all of these different things that have driven him in life, worked out well in a lot of facets. And then he goes, look at my jawline. And people go, whoa, you have this Mickey Mouse phenomenon all of a sudden where people are like, geez, wow, how do how's that happen? And you have some insecure young man looking at this, trying to figure himself out. And I was like, okay, I guess I better get in the Tough Mudder competition. And like do the Tough Mudder competition if you think that's the thing that like you're going to get the motivation to continue to pursue and do. If it's going to just be torture in the wrong way that just makes you lay in bed and cry and not actually do the Tough Mudder competition and just think about the Tough Mudder competition, then find something else. Don't worry about that.
Yeah. I mean, if you're miserable, stop. I think that's like another good. I didn't write that in the book. Shit. If you're miserable, stop.
Oh man. I've been thinking about that with sleep. Maybe, do you have anything to say about sleep? Because what were our hunter gatherers? I'm a huge napvocate, and I sometimes felt, a Midwestern upbringing. You wake up at 6 a.m. and you work for 12 hours a day, and that's how you get ahead in life. And I mean, I think it does work in a lot of manual labor kind of jobs quite well, but when you're in thought work, it's not the same. Naps.
No, I hear you.
Perfect.
So the Hadza nap sometimes, other populations nap sometimes. It's like not. That's another refreshing thing about living with the Hadza when we do the work is like they're not dogmatic about anything. They kind of don't give a shit about. There's no it's a very live and let live kind of thing. And if you can squeeze a nap into your day, good for you, They sleep about as much as we sleep. We've actually measured that with the Hadza and other populations too. So it's not just them, other small scale groups, 7 to 8 hours a day. And there was this idea that went around for a while that humans are supposed to sleep for much longer than that, but that we don't because of lights and TV and modern pressures and all this stuff. Turns out that's not true. Humans around the globe, even in different, very different situations, lifestyles, all sleep about the same amount of time. Now, naps are, my wife swears by naps. I can't do it for whatever reason. I can fall asleep at 2 p.m, but then if you wake me up before the next day, I just feel gross. Like I'm, and I think, it's some kind of failing in my upbringing. I wasn't allowed to nap properly or something. I never learned how. Whereas Janice, man, my wife, she's like goes to sleep, and I'm like, holy shit, she just woke up. And like 20 minutes later, half hour later, just on her own accord.
That's what I do.
Yeah.
I set an alarm and it almost never goes off, and I'm completely refreshed. I usually have come up with a good idea of a thing I was grinding away on. It's incredible. The other thing is I get grumpy. I'll stay up at night. I'm like, why am I so miserable at night? I just have the TV on and I'm like grinding out emails or whatever, and just go to bed, dude. Why are you talking? You're telling yourself this story that nothing in life is worth doing, but you've just been saying that for the last hour. Don't you think maybe you just need to go to sleep? And then I go to sleep and I wake up the next morning like, oh my gosh, I just needed to go to bed.
Yeah.
What?
That's a big thing. I mean, this is a whole issue. Like, how hard should one work? Right. That's a big question. I don't know if there's like a nice evolved answer for that. I think, what feels natural is probably a pretty good cue to what is natural. But, like in grad school, for example, man. So grad school is like this cauldron that all PhDs go through, and it's different for some people and better for others. But it's all like, it's one of these paying your dues. And all professions have this kind of like paying your dues portion of your professional trajectory, right?
Yeah.
So grad school is paying your dues. And I remember, and I got caught up in it totally. Oh, if you're not working Saturdays and Sundays, do you even care? Are you even showing up? If you're not working till 3 a.m. and then waking up at 7, are you even trying? And it becomes, and like you think, well, how did that really develop? Because it wasn't really your advisors telling you that. And what you realize is that, oh, it's because I got to school in the morning, and this person who's insecure about how much they're doing wanted to talk about how they were up all night doing it because they wanted to feel good. And maybe, I don't know if it's just insecurity talking about, I'm working really hard. And then you think, oh, I guess that's how that's supposed to go. So you start working really hard. And then pretty soon there's like zero bandwidth for anything else. You were just doing 90 hours a week of your job. And,
you know why you did that, Herman? Because everyone was lying to you about how much they were working and you believed them.
I know. What an idiot. And I was probably lying too. I was probably rounding up too. I'm sure I was. And then, here's the thing. I married somebody. I got involved with, and then eventually married somebody who's not in my profession. And she's an architect. So they had their own like paying your dues stuff going on. But because we didn't have the same, because it was kind of this, not the same culture, we could hear each other saying the things and being like, that sounds stupid.
Yeah, right.
And we were like, oh, wait, let's have a life where like we take breaks from what we're doing. And what you realize is, oh my God, for me anyway, that was like the magic, because I'm way more productive if I don't try to do 80 hours. Who the hell can do 80 hours a week, anything?
Yeah.
And so much more productive by just being, by like keeping my weekends for not work stuff as much as I can. Keep my night times for not work. I mean, sometimes it is, but to try to keep it and really try to work when you're supposed to be working and give yourself breaks. Otherwise, I think especially in an intellectual thought-based career, you got to let the well fill back up before you start taking more out.
Well, I mean, it's not like my brain would turn off at 5 o'clock anyway if I did clock out. I get more done working 20-30 minutes at a time from the time I wake up until night, taking as many breaks as I want, eating, exercising anytime that I want. Working is usually the first thing that I do, and when I wake up, and it's usually the last thing that I do before bed, but it's casual all through the day. And I mean, find the thing that works for you. But anyway, the last couple little things, you had mentioned the gosh, what's their name again? Let me write it down.
Hadza.
There are big letters. I remember, so you'd mentioned them being kind of live and let live. I remember that from your class, you were talking about kind of gender roles and stuff, and how males or females, they didn't tell one another what to do. People could kind of make a case for their perspective, but there wasn't well, the men are in charge around here, so we let them make the decisions.
Yeah, none of that. There's none of that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very progressive, which is hilarious, because as far as we can tell, and not just the Hadza, but other hunter-gatherer groups too, that was probably the norm. It's only when you get to agriculture and you can control a land, and not only do I own this particular plot of land, which is a kind of a weird idea, but I can pass it on to my offspring, and then we can kind of keep that in the male line, and you get this sort of weird asymmetries in wealth inequalities building up. And so really it seems like it's agriculture and domesticated animals that become this intergenerational wealth that you can transfer down, where you get the strange, hierarchies building up, and often it's a male-based hierarchy. But yeah, hunter-gatherers, man, they don't ascribe to that for the most part. The Hadza certainly don't. And it's it's awesome, because everybody just kind of does their own thing, and like you say, there are people who just, because they're cool people and successful at being good hunter gatherers, and they earn the respect of people, and so they carry their word carries more weight. It's a natural sort of phenomenon, but they can't tell anybody what to do. It actually, to their detriment these days, because now you have the Hadza population within Tanzania, and the Tanzanian government is trying to figure out how to run the whole country. And, you know, how do we allocate land and space and rights and who, you know, so it would be nice if somebody could speak for the Hadza, right, in these governmental, higher level government things, go to Dar es Salaam or the regional offices and talk at that level.
Mm-hmm.
Hard to do because there's nobody there. But, you know, that's another thing that when Europeans came to North America, and the Europeans came out of a very hierarchical, you know, a monarchy based system. They came to these North American tribes and said, yeah, tell me who the leader, I want to talk to the king, you know? And as often as not, I mean, there's lots of different tribes in the US and in North America, and lots of variation in cultural diversity there too. But as often as not, there was no clear person to be in charge, right? I don't know, who do you talk to? Talk to Bob. I don't know, you know, and people were making weird decisions and sort of poor decisions because there was just not a mismatch between the way that they ran their political worlds.
Tying some of this together with the you got a fruit tree and those primates are going to be a little more territorial, a little more aggressive. Do you think that I mean, just seeing I remember one of your wonderful little graphs of all the different arrows of humans spreading over time, and humans just had this. We could venture off into all land and every which direction and go just like, hey, let's just go run a bunch of woolly mammoth off a cliff, and there's more food than we could ever eat, and not that it was always that easy, but you could just keep on expanding until you couldn't, or you put the constraints on yourself where it's like, well, now I have this stockpile, so I need to stay here. And now you have a valuable stockpile that maybe there's people that might want to take that from you. And do you think that it's possible that some of our modern because we often think aggression is this primitive thing that us classy people need to get over, but is it possible that the way in which we're accumulating resources and have the kind of new modern property rights and have ran out of world to expand into, and not everyone can have their own skyscraper, etc. Is it possible that that's made some aspects of modern humanity kind of more territorial, more aggressive, more warlike than some, not all, just in, you know, I don't even know if I'm painting with a broad brush here. I'm saying in certain instances.
Well, so here's how I would frame it. I would say that, you know, humans have been hunting and gathering for 2.5 million years, since before we were Homo sapiens. And, you know, the key part of that we talked about before, you know, women and men kind of do their own thing. You have this gender division of labor in most hunting and gathering groups. And regardless of who's doing which jobs, it's hunting and gathering. You have the and in there. That's the critical piece. You know, people want to focus on the hunting and the gathering. It's the and that's so weird, right? What other species has, okay, guys, you half of the people do this and you half of the people do that. And at the end of the day, we're going to all share it together. There's no other species that does that. That is insane, right? And that's hunting and gathering. And that's what we've been doing for 2 million years. So somehow that got started and took off and was hugely successful because it's this really balanced portfolio kind of way to make a living, right? You can never kind of go too wrong because you kind of got two bets going all at the same time. But it only works if you share, right? So the and is the critical piece there. So what happens? You get this species that has become incredibly pro-social, right? And if you are in my group, I will share with you, and you don't even, like, little kids will do this. You don't have to be taught to do this. You will be pro-social and share. And we're possibly one of the few examples of a group selected species, actually, where, you know, we're actually so pro-social that we don't even worry about who's kin and who's related genetically. We just share within our group. That's the way that our brains are wired. That's one pretty strong theory about how things evolved in humans over the last couple million years. Okay. The other side of that is you can't just share with everybody. You share with your group, right? So if you're in group, if you're my tribe, you're my group, then my brain literally works with you the same way that it would work with family, right? Those same mechanisms are activated. If you're not my group, then you might not even be human, right? And so I think that was probably always cooking and simmering. And that's one of the reasons that you have the success of hunting and gathering, because you have these really successful groups that do so well and expand and have lots of babies and get all over the world. And then you start running out of real estate and the groups start bumping up against each other. And the ones that do a better job sharing in and not sharing out do better and better. And then and then you have industrialization and the stakes get higher, because now we're not just going to go and, run into your village and beat you up or maybe stab you with it. We're going to bomb you. Right. And then things get really, really bad really quickly. But I think, I don't think that the fundamental argument about, oh, you're us, you're in group, you're family, versus, you're them and we don't like you. And we, you see all this demonization happening to others, whoever the other is, right? Right now, the other is China. Yeah. Early in the Trump presidency, the other was
of others.
Yeah, the long list of others, right? Muslims, if you're, Trump's America, the others were Muslims. There's a Muslim ban. People coming from South and Central America and Mexico, they were the others. They had to build a wall, right? So you see this kind of talk happening, and it's like, it could be 2 million years ago. This would make sense to people, right?
Yeah.
So I think the stakes get higher because there isn't any more land to go to, and because the tools that we have to stick the other guy are so much more nasty, right? I mean, we've just built these incredibly potent, economic and war devices to sort of to hurt the out group and keep the in group safe. And so that's why it's so important that we watch the language we use when we talk about others, right? That's why it's so meaningful, because people are always, it's all politically correct to call it like it is, and I'm going to say it like it is, and that group is just terrible people, and you won't say that because you're too politically correct.
Yeah.
It's like, well, actually, if you start demonizing and dehumanizing people, you've actually set into motion this whole psychology that allows you, it makes it okay to do these horrible things. And so actually the language totally matters.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, as a stand-up comedian, I've seen comics do that. Buckle your seatbelts. It's always like, I mean, if you want to have a who can alienate the most people competition, I promise you, I can win every award. You need to measure by the amount of laughs had, but also people walked at the same time. No problem. I got abortion jokes or whatever. No,
right.
But it's easy to push people's buttons if you set out to do that. But it's always people that there's a lot of buildup, like, whoa, what I have to say is so dangerous. It's always just like the kind of dumb stuff that you heard playground bullies say. It's never terribly nuanced or interesting. And then they always suppose that they're speaking for everybody too, like you said, like, well, everyone thinks this. Like, no, actually.
Yeah, right.
I don't.
Yeah. It'd be fun to sort of think about comedy as, which percentage of jokes are in group versus out group. Like, I think about the jokes about the everyday stuff. And I don't know, I don't know if this is even a reasonable reference, but like the Jerry Seinfeld humor in my mind, it's like observational. This is my, we can all relate to this. because isn't this funny thing that I'm just going to talk about in a funny way? And we all relate to this versus like, telling jokes about the other group.
Yeah.
You ever notice those people? What about those people? Do you ever notice, and like, so it's like, it's in group versus out group humor. You can probably draw a bright line between people's, what people get their laughs out of.
Yeah. There's a lot of like, this guy's shirt looks stupid in the front row, and people are like, I love it when you make fun of people in front of the crowd. People love crap like that. Which is why I've started doing my own shows that are curated to a different demographic, of people that aren't just being fleeced for overpriced drinks. But yeah, anyway, I could talk all, because I wanted to say in group thing, there's like tension too with, say, family, for instance, where you have this you do share genes, or you do have people that are in your church or a part of your town or whatever, that they do kind of represent you in certain out groups, but you're like, hey, that doesn't, it's almost like, how there's phantom limbs, and then where you have this mind map and your arm gets cut off, but in your neurologically you still have an arm, and then there's the opposite where you have like the part of your brain doesn't have that, and so you have your left arms like out of control and moving about, and sometimes like members of in-group or relatives or whatever can feel like that, like, hey, I know this arm looks a lot like it looks a lot like the other one. I'm telling you, I have no control over this thing.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
This doesn't represent who I am. Yes, it's attached to me. Well, anyway, Herman, I just want to thank you for sharing with everybody, and congratulations on the new book, Burn.
Yeah.
All of my listeners will check it out and check you out on Twitter and Instagram. What are your Twitter and Instagram handles?
They're both, I think I'm at Herman Pontzer at both, or maybe I'm H Pontzer on Instagram. I'm more of a Twitterer.
Yeah,
I'm trying to get over into Instagram more, but I'm a lot more active on Twitter.
Well, it's a good place for academics. You share a lot of cool research and stuff, and latest findings of retweeting other people and stuff like that. I saw you getting like a metabolism dispute not too long ago, and oh man, I was there for it. Yes. I love science.
Oh, there's just, you could spend a career just being angry online. So I try not to do that too much, but it is fun sometimes. Sometimes I indulge.
Yeah, I indulge a little bit. You may have noticed I indulge from time to time. All right, Herman, you're awesome. Thank you so much for joining me again. And thank you, listeners, for being such wonderful, curious people. We'll talk with you next week.